How are we doing, New Hampshire? We are in the studio in Manchester. Welcome to the Jon Kiper Show. I'm Jon Kiper. How we doing? Just want to introduce myself. I've lived in New Hampshire pretty much my whole life. Grew up in the Seacoast area. My parents moved to Stratham so that my dad could work at the power plant in Seabrook. He was a nuclear engineer. Graduated from Exeter High School in 2001. After that, I traveled around the world, studied in Australia for a bit, and then came back, started my own publishing company, published a bunch of books, some music. And in 2015, I opened up my own restaurant in Newmarket called Johnny Boston's International, where I've been pretty much ever since. Now, when I moved to Newmarket and opened my restaurant, I realized I was going to have to get involved in local politics because we had some problems with our town. We didn't have enough parking, and frankly, our property taxes are pretty darn high. So I got on the ZBA, and I served on the Energy Environment Committee and then the Town Council. And I quickly realized that New Hampshire did not have enough housing, and it wasn't being addressed. And when I would talk to people in government, I would say, you know, us young people, there's not really enough housing for us. They would say, oh, you're going to have to move. And I would say, I don't want to move. I like living in Newmarket. So I had looked it up in 2015 and realized that I was qualified to run for governor of New Hampshire. That is, I'm over the age of 30. I've lived in the state for more than 7 years, and I'm a registered voter. So, ladies and gentlemen, folks at home, I'm here to announce that I'm running for governor of New Hampshire. And the main reason, as I said before, that I want to run is housing. I think housing is crucial to our state. It's crucial to helping young people stay here and having a thriving economy. And inflation is through the roof. I don't have to tell you. You're going to the grocery store. You're seeing the prices. And you know what's the leading cause of inflation? Housing. So we've got to address housing. So this is my plan, okay? You ready for this? This is my plan. I want to legalize cannabis, sell it the same way that the state of New Hampshire sells liquor, and use the profits for affordable housing. We can put the money to the New Hampshire Housing Authority. I've also got this other idea I'd like to put a little money towards. I think we should take our vocational schools and our apprenticeship programs, and we should use those to build tiny homes and use those tiny homes to house our unhoused individuals, veterans, disabled folks, anybody who's living off the street. We live in one of the wealthiest states in the country. Did you know that? Yes. New Hampshire is one of the wealthiest states in the country, yet we have a homeless population, and I think we should fix that. Now, when I decided that I was going to run for governor, I thought, you know, I should probably look at the other folks that are running. So I had to look at the Republicans, and you know what I saw? I saw a career politician and a lobbyist. And then I looked at the Democrats. You know what I saw? I saw a career politician and another lobbyist. So I am here, and I'm running as a Democrat, and I'm doing it for a simple reason. Because I think the people of New Hampshire want a different type of candidate, a different choice to be made. So that's why I'm getting out there, and I'm doing this show so that I can let you folks know about my platform and my ideas. And you can learn more at my website, which is votekiper.org. You should check it out. I got a lot of great ideas for the state of New Hampshire. And yes, I'm running as a Democrat. That's how I voted basically my entire life. Been a registered Democrat since 2016. You know, before that, I consider myself an unaffiliated voter. You know, I maintained the idea that maybe, just maybe, I'd run for or vote for a Republican. But, you know, be honest, mainly I've voted for Democrats. Now, when I looked at the folks who are running, the Democrats, I looked into it because I wanted to see what the competition was going to be like. And I discovered that Cindy Warmington, one of the people that's running, was a lobbyist for Purdue Pharma. And this is what the Republicans have started attacking her on, is that she was a lobbyist for Purdue Pharma. And I found this really shocking at first. I said, you know, we have had a Republican governor in this state for the last 8 years. And the Democrats really think that a lobbyist for Purdue Pharma is going to be able to win an election for governor in a state that was decimated by the greed of the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma and OxyContin. I don't know if you knew this, but 80% of the people who are addicted to heroin in this state started out by using OxyContin that was prescribed by a doctor. I know, it's scandalous. And we all know the stories now about the Sackler family and the greed that fueled that heroin epidemic, which we are still struggling with right now, and which I think probably has a lot to do with our growing homelessness population. The other person who is running for governor right now is the former mayor of Manchester, Joyce Craig. Now, I've met Joyce and her husband Mike at a number of events. They are lovely people. I just want to say that first. But the criticism that Joyce Craig has really been getting from the Republicans is pretty basic. You know, they're saying, you know, if Joyce Craig was the mayor of Manchester for 8 years, and Manchester has a very large homelessness population that has really not been, it hasn't really, the homelessness situation in Manchester has not really been solved. How is she going to solve the homelessness problem in the rest of the state? And I think that's a fair question for people to ask themselves. You know, if I was Joyce Craig and I was running for governor, you know what I would do? I would say, I couldn't solve homelessness in Manchester because I didn't have the resources. But as governor, I'm going to have the resources, and this is my plan for homelessness and housing in the state of New Hampshire. As of yet, I haven't heard that. Now, and it's possible that Joyce Craig's team is waiting to bring that plan forward at just the right moment. But frankly, I think that moment is probably now. But to learn more about the housing and the homelessness issues in Manchester, I've got my guest today is Adrienne Beloin, the former director of housing stability in the fine city of Manchester. Adrienne, thank you so much for coming down today and chatting with me about your experience working with the city of Manchester. And just, I'd really like to know first, how was it when you first got hired by Joyce Craig? And, you know, I assume you probably had a lot of, you know, you're probably really excited about it and probably, you know, had some great ideas that you're ready to implement. And I'm just curious as how that went.
Yeah. So, hi. Happy to be here, and I'm happy to support your first show. This is so exciting.
Thank you. I know.
And I'm so glad someone like you is running, and people are kind of taking chances and getting out there, and I think that that's the way I approach things as well. So I was excited when I first came on board in Manchester to try to help, as you say, solve the homelessness problem, which I think is a daunting task for anyone. I don't think anyone should be expecting that someone's going to solve homelessness. Like, we do have a lot of goals when we talk about homelessness. We talk about wanting to have functional zero status of certain communities, or kind of ending veteran homelessness. Things like that are important to talk about because we should feel like we're not going to stop short of something. We should feel like we have a pretty high bar and a high standard of what we want and what we think is ethical. But the reality is that it is a slow game, and it's something where working with homelessness and managing homelessness and evolving with the changes that happen with homelessness is more the goal. So when I took the job, I was excited, but right away it seemed clear that people were unsure what the job description meant, and they were unsure what the deliverables were going to be. And very soon into my time there, I started to feel this intense pressure of people kind of saying, well, how come nothing's changed? It's been a month. What has happened? Right? Like, it's been 2 months. What has happened? So I think that that's super important for people to understand when they think about homelessness, is that getting in there and doing the work is not going to look like things are changing around instantly. And a lot of politicians don't appreciate hearing that either, because they really want to have wins. Right? Like, politicians want to have wins. They want to say, hey, I went on a campaign, I talked about a bunch of things I'm going to do, and now I got to have these press releases that kind of fire out that I'm nailing it.
Well, I think it's particularly for the governor, you know, it's a 2-year cycle. You know, he or she's got to have, wants to have results in 2 years, which honestly is probably not that realistic. I mean, how much can you fix homelessness in 2 years? You can probably get some things going, but it's definitely going to take much longer than that.
Yes, I mean, homelessness has been around for decades and decades and decades since deinstitutionalization in the 70s, right? Like, so we've had homelessness happening and no one has been able to solve it
Yeah.
or put a dent in it to any degree. Now, there has been some successes along the way. People have heard me talk about the success that the VA has had, because the VA for a long time was considered the national shame in the way that they responded to homelessness for the vet community. And back when I was doing this work in my earlier part of the career, 50% of the people we were serving were vets, right? So it was really the national shame that, obviously I thought it was shameful that anyone was homeless, but from the standpoint of setting people up in a way where a lot of the damage that had been done to cause some of their homelessness was related to their service.
Yeah, PTSD.
And also the ability for the medical care and other things like that, the benefits to come in and wrap around people. So it went from the national shame. I remember going to conferences that were titled that, and then all the way to where we are now, which is New Hampshire is one of the leading states in the last year for reducing veterans' homelessness. And then over the last 10 years, it's been reduced by 50%.
In the state or in the nation?
In the nation, it's 50% down.
Okay.
So I think in this last year, it's something like 21% decrease in New Hampshire, and there's only 100 vets or something like that statewide that are homeless.
What
actually,
percentage of the homeless population would that be?
so I think 100 out of like 1,600 or something like
Okay.
that statewide. So it's a low number.
Okay, good. That's great,
Yeah.
because I had seen a national number for, I think it was maybe around 30%. Now it was adults. This is important. It was adult homeless population. 30% were veterans, but that might have been an old number.
Yeah, I think that might be an old number.
Okay.
So there's been some good results. But so the interventions that can reduce homelessness have been demonstrated by these successes, right? So it's not to say that successes can't happen or politicians can't be responsible for successes happening in their tenure. It's more like, we have to appreciate that these things have evolved over time, and those evolutions of best practices have taken shape, and we have to follow the paths that are in front of us and kind of repeat the things that are actually showing the success. And then there's always innovation too, right? Like, so alongside of doing what we know is working and then tweaking or innovating and trying different things in other directions in order to kind of look at that, measure it, see if it's working, make another decision, and that's the part where the public can get very frustrated, because if you're trying something and you're working on something and you're looking at it and you're seeing what works and what doesn't, people will get frustrated, like, well, your original idea wasn't a slam dunk.
Yeah.
But that's actually how these things work. It's how innovation happens in any sort of field or market, when you're making recipes, right? When you're...
Well, it's a really good point, because, in my restaurant, what we do is I'll have an idea for, a new item. And, obviously the first thing is I test it out on myself, obviously. And then we run it as a special and we find out if people, like it.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's winners and sometimes there's losers. I will say there's been some ideas that I've had for food. This hasn't happened a lot, but I remember a couple different recipes I was following, and I got to this point where I put the sandwich together and I had it in my head and it was going to taste perfect. But when I actually went to eat it, it was terrible. And I had to literally throw away. One time I had made this huge batch of, it was some kind of a soy sauce. I had this chicken teriyaki idea, and I made this massive batch of sauce, and it wasn't quite right. And I kept doing that thing where I was adding a little bit more of this and a little bit more of this until the batch got bigger and bigger. And I tasted it, and I was like, Johnny, you got to throw this away. This is not good. But it's part of the process, And sometimes when I have, a special that people love and they're just demanding more of it, we put that on the permanent menu. And I think government sometimes, wants to operate the same way.
Yeah.
But the customers, being the public, are seeing, the failures maybe highlighted more than the successes.
Yeah. And I think like one of the pitfalls that I've noticed happened, and maybe during the Craig administration, was there was this kind of an annoyance and a reliance on the systems that already exist. This idea of like, and it's totally true, the 211 system does not work well for us, right? It's not, it's a phone call that doesn't really connect people to anything, and it's not exactly the tool that we need to be functioning the way that it could, and especially with the money and the resources behind it. And then other things like, the Doorways program where people are going in and getting access to treatment. In Manchester, that system is not quite working the way that it should. So there's systems issues, but I think it's a pitfall to be annoyed at that to the extent where you're just kind of throwing your hands up and saying, well, this is broken, or this isn't working well, or the state's not doing enough, or the federal government hasn't come in and done this other thing, so what are we going to do? That's, we're at the mercy of those systems that don't work. And I think sometimes people can spend campaigns or tenures talking about that and just being annoyed that they're not getting what they need, when really you should radically accept that and appreciate, okay, that sucks, right?
Yeah.
And it would be nice if you could complain and that would turn around, but since it's not, let's not waste a whole bunch of time being annoyed about that. Let's go ahead and innovate and do what we need to in the meantime, so that we're not at the mercy of
this broken system. Yeah. I mean, I think that's really what I'm trying to bring the people of New Hampshire as a candidate, which is, I've spent some time in local government, as I said, but I am definitely not a creature of the system in any way. And I find that this thing happens, and I talk to people that have been in government for decades, and the only solutions that they can see are within the system, like you're saying, and they're boxed in, and it's got to be these things, these options, and if the solution is outside of that box, or if the problem is the system itself, which is generating the issues, it's really hard to see that. And that's where, I'm a creative thinker and I'm a creative person, and I just love solving problems. I just do. I'm an ideas person. I love just coming up with ideas and seeing them through. And I've done this a bunch of times in my life with various projects. I have probably started and not finished many more projects than I've actually finished. And if you judge me by my failures, it would say that guy's a failure. But it took me trying to write 10 books before I finished one book. You know what I mean? And all those books that were, didn't ever see the light of day. It wasn't that they were failures. They were steps towards the success. Yeah. And do you feel that maybe, obviously this is just a sort of a thought experiment, but if someone had said to you, you have this job for 5 or 6 years and you cannot be fired, you know what I mean? And that no matter what they, and obviously there's people overseeing you, but you think it's really just a patience thing, and that these things are gonna work, but if you keep every 2 years, you decide you need to scrap everything and start over, you're never going to see any results that are positive.
Yeah, absolutely. I really worry about the sustainability of things that happen going forward in Manchester if we're only looking at things that stint of mayor's administrations, right? Because that mayor is building on something to take with them someplace else. Yeah. And it's not necessarily going to set us up for the long game in Manchester.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of one of the issues that I saw when I started looking at, Joyce Craig's approach. I heard a lot of people say she was very good at getting federal funding for things, which is great, until the federal budget deficit is 35 plus trillion. And I think that particularly the younger generations need to start taking the federal budget seriously. For years, we used to think, it doesn't matter. The U.S. government can run up these massive budget deficits. It doesn't affect us. But what's happening right now is, if we're relying on the federal government for housing money, and for instance, the New Hampshire Housing Authority is primarily funded by the federal government, that money is going to dry up very quickly, very, very soon. Why? Because they physically are running out of money. The interest on the national debt is so huge right now anyway that at some point, Congress is going to say either we're cutting the amount of money we're giving to states or we're raising taxes on rich people. What do you think they're going to do first? I doubt they're going to tax anybody anytime soon. So it's really important, I think, that we come up with solutions, and even funding solutions, that are sustainable within the state. So if this federal money dries up, we're not, out in the cold, literally. Yeah. So that's where my housing approach, where I was like, let's take this cannabis money, which is money that's already going to other states, keep it in the state, and put it specifically towards housing, not towards the general fund where it could be used, for instance, to cut taxes on millionaires. No, we put it directly towards housing so that in some ways the legislature can't get in there and meddle with it to do other things that aren't the biggest issue right now. And I have a really hard time thinking that there's any issue, in the state of New Hampshire or really the country that is bigger than housing. I mean, to me, housing is such a fundamental requirement of just civilization.
Yeah.
And it seems like, I think back about, you think thousands of years ago when the first humans started living together, at some point they said, hey, let's put our tents, together because it'll be safer from the wild animals. We can protect each other and, we can work as a team. And when you see that failing, I just feel like it's really starting to stretch sort of the fabric of civilization in a way. Mm-hmm. In a way that's, it's there's this idea that, you can bulldoze homeless encampments and that they're going to just suddenly have the housing. It just seems wild to me.
Well, what you're talking about, John, feels like something I haven't heard people talking about enough, is this idea of like, how are you putting building blocks together to think about things from an urban planning perspective or a rural planning perspective or whatever it is. Like, how are we not, and it's not that no one's doing this. I think there's other statewide agencies that are looking at the housing issues.
Definitely.
And, people are mapping this out and they're appreciating kind of the buildable land and the NIMBYism and the different pieces that need to move around for housing. But there's not enough of appreciation of like, how do we build for a civilization? How do we take care of the vulnerable populations within that civilization? What do we need to put together? Who needs to kind of sacrifice on one end to move something forward on another end?
Yeah.
And the other issue that I see getting in the way is whether it's administrations or there's boards that are decision makers in this kind of process. There's a whole lot of ego that's driving whatever it is they're focused on. Some ego about they themselves looking like some sort of a hero for making something happen or having an idea or bringing a resource forward or taking something with them when they move on to another opportunity. Or ego around like, maybe there's religious values or other things that people want to see brought forward. And that's more important than a bigger picture of what happens when they're dead and gone.
Yeah.
And, what happens to the community and what are we doing in a not selfish way to put things together. It has nothing to do with me, whatever it is I'm trying to put forward.
Yeah.
It's about what gets built and what momentum happens after me. And I don't hear enough people talking about that.
Yeah, I think it's, it's legacy, and it's really about what we are leaving our children and our grandchildren. I mean, that's really important to me. Let's talk really quickly about, so after Joyce Craig, obviously she finished up her time as mayor. How has it been working with the Republican, her successor, Jay Roos?
Yeah, so it's been very different. I really enjoyed working with Joyce Craig. I feel like she was very supportive and aligned with the ideas around building forward sustainable things for the slow game of reducing homelessness. I think she appreciated that it's more complicated than what it looks like, and you're not going to shoot from the hip and kind of put these things in place and it's just going to work, right? I think Mayor Rouet is very different in that way, which I found refreshing in some ways, that he was more of a shoot from the hip kind of person, like, let's try something. And it sounded like innovation, right? It sounded like, let's try it and take a look at it and pivot. I think what also is true about Mayor Rouet is he seems to have alliance and allegiance to a lot of different people that have different values and egos in different spaces. And I think that he's beholden to that in a lot of ways. So as much as I felt like he was innovative and listening and really kind of taking things in and wanting to evaluate it, it also seemed very much he has a set plan that's been set for a long time, and his responsibility is just to carry that out and deliver on it. So things around criminalization, things around strengthening the police kind of response to homelessness, this is the direction that we were not going in the previous administration, and it's important that the pendulum swings back in that direction.
Yeah.
So it's been night and day.
Yeah, I find it frustrating, the idea that we would, criminalize homelessness and potentially lock people up, which I'll point out costs $40,000 a year to lock somebody up in jail or prison, but wouldn't just take the time to build a home.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard this story I read this story about a guy I think it was in Phoenix, and he had cost the city of Phoenix $1 million. He's homeless, and he was just getting hurt. He's falling over, and and he kept going to the ER, and it cost the city
Yeah.
of Phoenix $1 million. And they figured out, hey, it'll cost us $30,000 to put this guy in an apartment, have a
Yeah.
nurse come and check on him. You know, and they basically took their 10 most basically expensive homeless folks who were older and were at disability and said, hey, it's cheaper for us to put them in housing than to have them on the street and have them going to the ER every other day.
Yeah.
And that's what I think people need to wrap their heads around is sometimes doing something that is actually kind is also fiscally responsible.
Yes.
We're wasting a ton of money by just not doing the simplest thing, which is building housing. And you know, you get into this moralistic argument of like, oh, these people don't deserve free housing. They've done this to themselves. I mean, I think it's fair to say almost anyone in New Hampshire, or many people in New Hampshire, are a couple of paychecks or a couple of medical emergencies away from being homeless, you know, a couple of missed paychecks. And I think that's really important for all of us to remember. Really quickly, you know, you parted ways with the city of Manchester. Did you feel that was, you know, inevitable in a way that really they were never going to have someone in that position that, you know, that they were going to really, you know, be able to work with?
I think in the previous administration, we were moving in all the directions that we needed to. The change in the administration was not going to accept the game plan that I had going forward, right? Which was largely around, let's wrap our arms around the data. Let's appreciate the data of the people that we're trying to serve. Let's go ahead and plug and play with connecting people to resources, getting the folks connected that can be connected, and then appreciating that we have to do things like build housing, right? Have supportive kinds of shelter environments, encampment environments, housing environments. We're going to have to spend money in this way. We're going to have to figure out how to resource it. And that is the way that the VA has moved forward. That is the way that HUD is you know, imploring us all to move forward in communities, and this is the way that you reduce homelessness in a community. There is not another way. And I think that this administration was very set on the idea that they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do it. So any sort of me, you know, speaking about, you know, what people deserve or what the right ways to go about things are, we're going to be met with, I don't want to, basically.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being my first guest. This has been really fun. Hopefully it's been informative for you, the viewer, and you've learned a little bit about homelessness, learned a little bit about me, Jon Kiper. You're going to be hearing a lot more from me. I'm going to be on this show twice a month, and I hope that you can check out my stuff, votekiper.org. Again, I'm here because I love New Hampshire, and I want to live here. I believe in the live free or die state. Be good.